Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, cha, bonjour, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We are coming to you from the beautiful, wonderful, historical neighborhood of Reedville, located in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so very honored and absolutely delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. You can join us in our mission by telling all of your family and friends about the show and letting them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Audible, CastBox, Player FM, wherever you find your favorite shows. We have a really fantastic show for you today. Padma Venkatraman is here to celebrate Safe Harbor. And later in the show, Jennifer Burns will be here to celebrate building readers from playground to print. Before we invite our guest into the studio, I would love to invite you to visit a very special website. It's clownswithoutborders.org. Clownswithoutborders.org. This is a group that I absolutely adore. I am part of Clowns Without Borders, and I had the honor of being part of the 2023 tour of El Salvador. I had so much fun joining with artists from all over the world to bring a smile to people who really needed it and really appreciated it too. And we would love for you to join us as a monthly Joy Maker. The Joy Makers, they're a family of people just like you who love to laugh and make other people feel good. So please take a moment and visit clownswithoutborders.org and consider joining me as a Joy Maker. Join us right now from right down the road from our studios here in Reedville. She is in the beautiful state of Rhode Island. We're here to celebrate her new middle grade novel, Safe Harbor. Please welcome to the show, Padma Venkatraman. Padma, how are you?
I am so well and so excited and honored to be on your show. Thank you, Jed.
I'm delighted. One of the things that hit me when I visited your website to kind of prepare for the interview, you have this quote on your splash page. It says, "Stories are ships on which we sail oceans of compassion." Where did that quote come from?
I guess from my head, like like anything else. Yeah. I used to say that stories were ships that helped us sail the oceans of the imagination, but I was thinking about it, and I think it's the empathetic imagination, really, which is compassion to me.
Well, I love that we celebrate the fact that books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And the longer I'm doing this podcast, I understand getting to understand how important it is for kids to be able to see themselves portrayed positively in the pages of books. But being an old white guy, that was never an issue for me. And I really love the fact that books can be windows and give me an opportunity to look at characters and situations that I might not be exposed to in my everyday life and get to know people who are different, might speak a different language, eat different food, come from a different place in the world, see things differently than me. That's one part of diversity we seem to have a real hard time with. And just to see how much in common we all have.
Absolutely. I mean, I've lived in so many different places in the world now. So I left India when I was 19, and then I went first to England for a year, and I studied there at a school for 1 year. And then I came here when I was, just about 20, with nothing in my pocket at all. And I came to graduate school in this country, and I was the only dark-skinned female in my incoming oceanography class. So that was quite a shock. And like you said, you see so many things when you travel the world. You see so many differences, but you also do see the underlying similarities And I do think that that's why, you spoke about Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop's quote about, mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And I think the reason that it works is because both of those things exist, that we are so diverse and so different, but we are also so much the same.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned leaving India at 19, I think you said?
Yes.
And that in itself, I have a VA who's been working with me who lives in Mumbai, and have sponsored different students in different parts of India. That is an incredibly diverse country. I was shocked to find out I think it was 28 official languages, but probably 2,800. That's an exaggeration, but probably not much. Too big.
You're absolutely right. We have close to 30 different individual languages, right? So distinct languages. And when I came here, people would say, without meaning to be condescending, but it was very condescending, do you speak which dialect then? And I used to say to myself, no. We have different languages. Yeah.
Yeah. And and to go from there to England to the States. And you mentioned with really without a cent in your pocket, where did you get the strength and the courage to do that?
I don't know. Maybe I was just young and foolish. I think there's sometimes, not always. I mean, some people are just, brave. I think sometimes there's a fine line between courage and stupidity, or maybe I shouldn't use the word stupid, actually. I think that has a strange root. But courage and silliness, and I think I might have been just silly. Well, I think also, though, more seriously, I think that I really wanted to lead my life my way. I was very independent-minded, and I did feel that if I had stayed in India, I would not have been able to make the important decisions about my own life. So I think there was an urge to leave in that way, to defy certain aspects of my tradition, although you can see that with Safe Harbor and with all my other books. I mean, I love India. I love so much about my Indian heritage and cherish that. But I also love so many things about America, which is the country of my adoption and the country I call home now.
Well, I am delighted that you're a part of our American family, and I'm really looking forward to you telling me about Safe Harbor.
Absolutely. So the little girl who is the protagonist in Safe Harbor is a little brown girl. I tend to write about brown kids primarily because when I was a kid, I didn't have that experience that you had, right? So, Jed, when I was growing up, in India, of all places, I would still, when I read English books, which were, plentiful and numerous, I often saw different facets of my identity being put down in a very bad way. So, Secret Garden is a book that, lots of people remember because there are beautiful things about it. It's magical and it's got a female protagonist and all of that. But she is so racist, and she actually says very racist things about people who look just like me and who I identify with. So as a little Indian girl, I think it was really hard to see that sort of thing. And I think that's why in books like Safe Harbor, it just comes out to me naturally to center the BIPOC experience, or to center the experience of people of color. So Safe Harbor started when I was taking a walk. You said I'm not too far down your street. I hope you've taken a walk down our beautiful Ocean State and some of the, So I was walking along a beach, and I saw this thing that, looked to me, as Gita says in the novel, like a sack of rice lying on the beach. And it was moving, and I thought, what is that? And I got closer, and I realized it was a seal. And so I got my phone out, and I was going to call the Marine Mammal Hotline, which is what you should do, which is what actually Miguel, her friend, does. That scene in Safe Harbor. And then before I even dialed, I think that seal, which I saw, was fine and just went straight back into the water. Okay. So it wasn't stranded. But because authors are a little bit weird in the sense that we always, sometimes we have to create problems. I think otherwise maybe stories wouldn't exist.
Uh-huh.
But in my head already, I could see this seal with plastic wound around its neck. And I could see these two little kids helping this seal. And so Safe Harbor became, on the face of it, an animal rescue story. And the kind of animal rescue story I would have loved to read when I was a kid, because in all my animal rescue stories, it was always white kids who were the heroes.
Uh-huh.
Right? But here we have two of these, and then we have a black female scientist who actually knows a lot about seals, who helps them, and who is helping the seal recover. But all my novels are quite textured and very layered and have lots of interwoven themes. So I started to realize, as I, got to know this character in my head, that Geeta, like me, had left India. Unlike me, she was a lot younger when she left India, and I came all alone, but Geeta comes to this country because her mother wants a better life. So her mother is the one that, pulls her to this country. And so Safe Harbor kind of turns the interpretation, or not the interpretation necessarily, but the experience that you see quite often expressed in books between cultures, where the parents are the ones holding on to the old country. In this case, it's Geeta who is hankering for, her grandparents, her cousin, her old life. Mm-hmm. And her mother is the one that, feels like, oh, we have so much opportunity in in America. In India, she has been treated very badly as a woman who is divorced from her husband. And that's something that's also very real to me, because my mother and my father were separated, which is very unusual in India at the time. And although it was really not my mother's fault, she was blamed for it and, treated a bit like a societal outcast. Yeah, which is horrible. So that's why Geeta's mother comes here. So there's that, there's divorce, there's immigration, and there's bullying, which, also Geeta experiences, as I did when I was a kid. She gets to this country in Geeta's case. And then there's an added layer, which is that Geeta's mother is a person who lives with depression and anxiety. And I think for me, it was very important, I realized writing this novel, that I deal with and live with, a lot of joy and a lot of love, but I also live with depression. And I think especially in young people's literature these days, we're doing a much better job of showing young protagonists with mental health or mental illness issues that are, strong, but we tend to still stereotype parents with mental health issues. And so often we see these sort of stereotypical depressed mom or dad, in a fewer cases, who has checked out, or grandparent in some cases, checked out doing nothing and is the problem. Whether they pointed to in that way or not, causes this problem for the kid, or is just not there, and then is not with it, is not portrayed as a parent who can take their responsibilities seriously. And I do think it's so important to show our children not just strong young protagonists with depression, but strong older protagonists with depression. And my daughter is 17, so she might tell you that I'm a horrible mom, but I think, and my husband thinks, that I'm a great mom.
Well, I would tend to agree with you and your husband, because my daughter was 17. My daughter was actually a gem. There was only one night which she was acting like her friends, and I said, I am not putting up with that like your friends' parents. But I love the fact that you're showing strong parents, because I'm not so as familiar with middle grade novels, but definitely most of the media that our kids are consuming at TV shows and movies, parents are portrayed horribly, especially dads. Dad's always a dope. It's like the butt of the joke, which is, yeah, I'm fine. You can make fun of me, but, I can do stuff. I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really, really felt like, she needed to show people with depression as also people who can be living full lives and being excellent parents.
Yeah. Can you talk and help me understand? Because I grew up when we didn't talk about mental health issues, and I hear the word depression, and I'm thinking, oh, well, somebody's sad, and you'll get over it at some point. You get happy, and oh, they're not depressed anymore. They're not suffering from depression anymore, and that's not the situation. Could you tell me, help me and some of our listeners kind of understand what it is to live with depression?
Sure. And I think that, probably every case is a little bit different, right? So there's probably a whole spectrum of this. But I think what we see often portrayed in literature is this very extreme sort of nervous breakdown. I can't do anything. I'm completely debilitated. And the illness has taken me over kind of situation with adults anyway. And I think that's not always necessarily the case. So you can also have a state in which there is low-lying depression. I mean, there are so many different causes for it. There can be chemical causes in some cases. Lithium deficiency, for instance, is something that's very commonly cited as sort of manic depression and moods, drastic mood swings, all of that kind of thing. It could be that. But there's a whole range of other reasons that could be. There could be trauma in your childhood, which induces that. And again, I should also be careful because I feel like I'm a scientist and I'm trained in oceanography. I'm not really trained in psychiatry or anything. So I don't want to say too much for fear of saying something wrong. But I will say that the experience of it, for me, has been that it does not necessarily need to be extreme. And there's so many different ways of looking after that. And I really want to say that while it is something that I need to think about when I plan my days and, think about in so many different ways, and it's certainly an important part of my life, it is also not something, thankfully, I think, that has held me back from being the person I want to be and living the life I want to live.
Yeah. How did you, as an oceanographer, because, well, I guess it's because, oceanographers, they got a lot of time in their hands. They don't need to, but I'm being facetious, obviously. But as an oceanographer, you're busy and there's lots going on in your life. I mean, we've only explored 5% of the ocean, so there's a lot to learn there, but you still find time to write novels.
Yes, and for the last 10 years, I have to confess that I have only been exclusively writing novels, and I've stepped away from oceanography because I didn't feel like I could be the professor I wanted to be, and the mom I wanted to be, and the writer I wanted to be, and everything else and that in my whole life. But for a little while, I was doing everything, and it was quite hard because oceanography is a fantastic science. It's so much fun. I want to say it's a fantastic science. And, you get to go out on, well, not all oceanographers. I'm sure there are some that can just, sort of sit in the office and do things. But in my case, I really enjoyed field work. And so sometimes we would go out to local areas near shore, maybe a marsh, to see what pollution was in there because I was doing pollution-related research. Or you might go out on research cruises on the ocean. And so you would be, out of sight of land for days. Doing work on a tiny ship.
Well, just saying that is kind of terrifying to me. That you're in the middle of this ocean that is so big and you can't see. It's silly, but it's like as long as I can see land, I can imagine that. Or if something happens, I can swim to shore. I understand that that's not realistic, but. I think being out on a ship where you can't see, you just see water is kind of terrifying. I've been there a couple of times, and it's like it doesn't keep me from enjoying myself. But there's always in the back of my mind like, oh, I hope everything's okay here.
Yeah, I could kind of see that, but I think I was really, as a little kid actually in India. You asked how I left. I think one of the other things that really drove me was. When I was a kid, apparently, I used to say that I wanted to be an astronaut or a deep sea diver. And maybe American kids say that, but for an Indian kid, that was a very unusual two things to be saying that I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Also, I always knew that I would, be a writer deep inside. So that was something that I just sort of feel like is so much a part of me that doesn't even need to be mentioned. But I felt like I really wanted to do one of those. And I think that the urge to do something different, to break down barriers that I saw imposed for women in India at the time was sort of, in a very deep way, inherently appealing to me.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I'm hearing that you've had this personality that's like, I don't like how this is happening, and I don't like the way women are being treated, and I'm not going to stand for it, and I might not be able to change here, but I'm going somewhere where I can make a difference. Where do you think that comes from? Was it someone in your life that you modeled that for you?
I don't know. My mother is in many ways extremely traditional, but she had to break out of the mold a little bit because my dad kicked her out of the house and kicked her out of the family. Mm-hmm. So in a way, maybe I saw that, but I think I also saw how people treated her and made me angry and upset. And luckily for me, I think I used the anger to fuel something positive. And I think maybe inherently, equality meant a lot to me. I didn't like being treated differently because I was a girl. And maybe if I had been a boy and people were treating me better than someone else, maybe I would have just enjoyed it. But, it wasn't that way. I was at the wrong end of that equality deal, and I just really didn't like it. And I think it upset me. It rankled me. I can't say that it rankled every other young female that I, knew when I was a kid. Clearly, some people just accepted it. And I don't know what it was, but it always irritated me. I think I had a deep sense of sort of justice, maybe, or seeking that.
Well, I am certainly glad that you had that trait inside you, because you're here now. I think it's wonderful anytime somebody steps up and fights the power, fights injustice, even if it's just making a better life for yourself. And I don't mean to say just like it's not a big thing. When people stand up for themselves, they're examples, and they empower other people to do the same thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I do hope my books will be empowering.
I have a feeling they will. One of the things I saw in the notes about your book is that Safe Harbor, it's kind of like, helping our kids or the characters learn that they sometimes when you find love, you have to be able to let it go. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think in one of the big themes in Safe Harbor, which is what I was very excited and happy because I got a starred review in School Library Journal, which said exactly that, picked up on that thread. And I think that thread shows up in many ways. There's a quote from the book which says, love is about holding with our hearts, but not with our hands. And I think that is very much a part of Safe Harbor, is just the idea that sometimes you have to be able to let things go to a certain degree. And I wonder if it was not something that I was almost writing for myself. My mother is now 92. I don't know how much longer she's going to be in this world. I was a bit of a shock. I was born very many years after her other children. But anyways, I think that maybe that has been part of, something that's been in the back of my mind is what does it mean to love someone when they grow away from you in a certain way? And we spoke about the fact that my daughter is 17 and 17-year-olds in general. And, that's also sort of going away. Soon she'll be off to college, and that is going to be a goodbye. And I think in the book, obviously the seal is sort of the metaphor for that. The seal is this creature that Geeta, who saves it, does something very human. She starts to call it my seal. She gives it a name. It's a wild animal, but in her head, she starts to sort of compare it to this pet dog that she had and had to give up. So she's making these connections, and then she realizes that, you know what? She does love this animal. And And one of the ways in which they communicate, which was important to me, is that even though I'm a scientist, and, science is, of course, extremely important to me, and cleaning up the world, we need science for, our planet with climate change and all these other things that are happening to it right now. But I do think that it's very important for me to also respect ancient Indian tradition and ancient other kinds of tradition, in which there has been so much knowledge that has been held and transferred and used that goes beyond science and that lives outside of the sort of scientific bubble, which is not to say that science, again, I'm a scientist, so not to say that that's wrong or bad or anything, but it's also to honor all the other ways of having knowledge and communicating with and respecting and relating to nature and the world outside us and, all the creatures in it. And one way that Gita does that in the novel is with the flute and music. And so, she feels like there's this connection, this interspecies connection, and a bond that she creates with the seal through her music. And so all of these things, I think, make her feel sort of attached to the seal. Mm-hmm. And she realizes that she has to let go of the attachment, and she can still love the seal. She can still love the people at home, despite the distance, right? And there's so many different ways in which love continues beyond those boundaries or beyond those limitations imposed by time or distance or any other sort of boundary or limitation that we can think of.
I think that's such an important lesson for all of us, but for especially young people, because I think there are some people who experience that pain of needing to let go and then decide, I don't want to love again. This is too hard. And it is hard when we have to say goodbye to someone or something that we love, but it's worth the pain, the love and the joy that we experience when we find that love and we share those special moments together. It's worth the pain that might come.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There seems to be so much that a family can talk about as they're experiencing safe harbors together. Talking about the ocean, the climate, relationships, what can we do? What would the one thing, if there was a family out there and they only had time to talk about one theme found in the book, what would you hope that they picked up on?
I suppose if you were to think of just one theme, it would be the most obvious one, and the one that is sort of an existential threat to the whole, all of humanity right now, which is, climate change and what you can do about it. And, in the book, Gita talks about little steps that you can take, like, a trash pickup or, she does something to restore dunes, those kinds of things that you can do to be sort of a good steward of nature, but you can also do bigger things. And there's a scene to me it is just one scene in this small book, but it's a very important scene where the kids talk about larger things that they can do as well later, lobbying people, changing the laws. And I do want to say to young people, it's not as though they're going to be in there changing the world without our help. I mean, there are several adults as well who have, wisdom and experience behind them who are right there to help to do what we need to do for this world. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you can talk about the music in the book, you can talk about relationships, you can talk about immigration, you can talk about, so many things. But probably that's the biggest theme and the most obvious one.
Yeah. Well, I hope to. I hope families find time to talk about more than one, because I think immigration, especially now, is such an important topic. But no matter where you land, what side you land on the issue, one of the things I pray the people understand is we're talking about human beings.
Yeah.
We're talking about human beings, and if we were in similar situations, we would want to immigrate and make a better life for our families. So, yes, there's so much in Safe Harbor. I love it. Where can we go to find out more about Safe Harbor and find out more about you?
Of course. I think the best place to go would be my website. but you have to spell it correctly. And, I can't tell you how many people misspell my name. And then even if it's written down really clearly in an email, they misspell it. Anyway, if you Padma Venkatraman and there's just one E, the only E is the one that comes after the V. All the rest are A's. So it's Padma Venkatraman, M-A-N. I feel like I have to say M-A-N, 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 because that's the place where people usually make a mistake. But if you spell my name correctly, padmavenkatraman.com, there is just a whole lot of resources that you can access. There's a menu, there's a drop-down menu. If you go there, there are a list of diverse books that you can read that I recommend, books on disability, on race. There's, lots and lots of different, there's writing prompts for young people or older people, not so young people. And there's also a whole lot of things for Safe Harbor that are just, in progress and being developed, because my wonderful publisher, Nancy Paulson, books from Penguin Random House, also helping me put materials together. And so there are already a few things that you can do. There's a, sort of a bingo thing that you can go in there and do different activities, a Safe Harbor bingo. There's a Kahoot to see how much you know about seals and all this kind of thing. So there's lots of fun stuff that families or classes or just individual readers and book clubs can go and find on my website. If they look at that, drop-down menu with the books and go to Safe Harbor, there's a ton of things that they can do.
Wonderful. We've had a really fascinating time speaking to the author of Safe Harbor. It's a brand new middle grade book from our guest, Padma Venkatraman, with only one E. Padma, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. And I do want to say also, if they wanted to follow me, that's probably the best way, is to follow me and follow my newsletter on the website. But I'm also at Padma TV, like television, because those are my initials, I don't even own a television at home. But on Blue Sky, which is new to me, and then Venkatraman.Padma on, Facebook and Instagram, which are the older.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Are you looking for a creative way to bond with your kids? Let me tell you all about Drawing with Your Kids, the ultimate destination for artistic adventures. Join us as we dive into the wonderful world of children's books with renowned illustrators guiding you step by step. From beloved characters to whimsical scenes, unleash your imagination and create cherished memories together. Whether you're a seasoned artist or just picking up a pencil, there's something for everyone at Drawing with Your Kids. Please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and click on the Drawing with Your Kids link at the top of the page and let the creativity flow. Drawing with Your Kids, where every stroke brings stories to life. Join us right now from the beautiful state of Iowa. Our guest is here today to celebrate her wonderful book. Is called Building Readers from Playground to Print. Please welcome to the show, Jennifer Burns. Hey, Jennifer, how are you?
Hi, and thanks for having me. This is wonderful to be here.
I'm delighted to have you on. What an interesting title, Building Readers from Playground to Print. Interesting and a little difficult for me to get out of my mouth this morning.
Yeah. When we came up with the title, I wanted the reader to really get the idea that the book was about the fact that children have this way of looking and seeing and hearing that's really playful, like being on the playground. That they have this way that's carefree, that's choice-free, like they go where they want to, they do whatever they want to. And from that lens, we have to take our students from this playground-based style learner into print, which now has different sets of rules than they're used to. And we often overlook that jump that has to take place because we don't take into consideration the kind of learner that we're working with or child, whether it be our own child or one within our classrooms.
It's a challenging thing when we're trying to teach our kids to read and to develop a love of reading, but it's so important.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I really, when I was going through this, I wanted to make sure I talked about I talk in the book about the fundamental for seeing like a reader. So you can think about how I just mentioned the playground. So now we have to see like a reader, which is different than on the playground, hearing like a reader, thinking like a reader, and then finally this self-efficacy of believing I can become a reader. And through that, then we can help kids to understand and transfer those skill sets that will make them be active and joyful readers, like believe that they can pick up anything. And when we use the things that I mentioned in my book, we can start to empower our own children to get to that point.
How exactly do we help our kids think and see like a reader?
I break it down a little bit more, but really it's a couple things. It's understanding the learner first. So if you want them to see like a reader, you have to understand how they're seeing, right? Like, and in the book, I start every point from that perspective. Like, this is how this is how a young learner thinks. And then, so if they're seeing, let's say I look out on the playground, I randomly see a tall structure and I like to climb, so I go to the tall structure. And if we take that skill of dominant way of thinking, like, oh, I really like something. And so then what happens when they go into identifying a letter is they see the tall stick, for example, maybe in the D and the B. Well, if they only see the stick, then they confuse the D and the B, right? Like, you can't see like a reader unless you understand the rule-based function of the fact that you can't just go, oh, hey, I like tall things, so I'll only look at the tall letters. Same for a word. If you go to see in a word and you use that playground way of thinking, then you see that way that you like to look, which is that tall letter or the short letter, or, hey, there's two letters together. And because of that, we let them be playful. And in the second way, we have to turn them into seeing like a reader, which is saying, hey, we have to start at this first letter first, and look at the left to right through a letter. So the first shape in a letter D is the circle, not the line. And we can help students to differentiate between letters when we understand how to go through the path of teaching and learning in that aspect. Similarly with thinking is the organization of thought. And that's why I always redefine it, because when you think like a reader, a lot of our earlier texts actually use the word I or we. And when you use the word I and we in a text, it puts the student, that self-centered student, which they really are, like that. It's really their personality. They're like selfish, I, me. And when they use the words like I and we or me inside of a text, the child actually sees themselves in a text, and it makes the text easier to take on because of that. And so as we start to think or organize our thinking around how it is that books work, right? Like, because it's not just that, oh, I can pick up this book and I actually understand that this book is going to tell me a story. The young reader actually thinks that the story could change every time they read it. Like, it's interesting. They don't have that, object permanence is what we think about, like, hey, it will always be there, will always stay the same. Children don't think like that. And so we really have to help them to go through the stages of learning to help them so that they can get to the point where they can think like a reader and really understand that the story is going to take place and it's in their head and it's on this paper. How do we do that?
Interesting. The idea that kids are thinking that a story might change every time you pick up a book. That's a new thing to me. Are we playing into that when we read the story differently to our kids?
Well, I think, differently when you turn in terms of, I grew up in a storytelling family. So, that when you talk about reading a book differently, I think of the language choice, the volume and the inflection that we choose to use it in can only aid to remind you that those words are the same. No, that's not quite what I meant. It's more that the fact that they think that the ending could change, or they think that, oh, when I turn the page, will it still be the same? They're like, oh, I don't know, will it? They don't understand that. Well, they come to understand that as their experience with text grows. And you can imagine the volume of kids that don't get read to, and so really, I love this podcast who really just elevates the desire to want to share text with kids, whether it be single page text that's just a joyful poem or a short story or any of those elements that just, help kids to understand joyful reading.
Yeah. Well, this is a fascinating, conversation and concept. What's your background? You didn't just call me up and go, I'm really smart. Let me talk about this stuff.
Oh, that's a great question. So, one of my first years of teaching, I've been teaching in the teaching profession over 30 years now. And when I first started, I'd always found, readers who have difficulty reading my passion. Like, you give me the hardest to teach kid, and that's where I want to be. You know, I want every kid on earth to find reading and writing, frankly, as joyful as I find it. Like, to pick up a pen, to pick up a book and find themselves, that they're not stuck in the life that they're in, that they can find this. And so I think when I went into my kindergarten room for the first time, there was so much I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I was doing to kids. Like, I'm going to read this book to you. I'm going to show you how to write this sentence. And then I'm just going to hope through osmosis or through, you know, multiple exposures, it's just going to, you know, somehow seep in. And that's how I really felt like back then. And I know there's this huge phonics movement now that's really not getting, even now, still not getting at the things that I mentioned in my book, because it's how they learn to look. It's how they learn to hear, and not just, hey, go do it, right? Like, hey, just blend these sounds or just go do that. And so because of that, I've gone to conferences. I love to study. Like, I absolutely studied to answer that question so that I could walk into a young kid's classroom and handle the hardest to teach, and believe that I could help every teacher. You know, I work in keynotes now, and I work with teachers and do professional developments. And I love that idea that there's so much to learn about the learner that's hasn't yet acquired a letter, or hasn't yet acquired hearing, or he hasn't yet acquired that. So I don't know that I fully answered that. How far did I come? But, you know, I have an MA 60. I literally love to study, 2 PhD studies, before I wrote this, and really just wanted to help teachers. So to make their life easier, and to align what they're reading with kids to what the kids are practicing in stations in a way that they're not guessing. And when I mean guessing, what I mean here is that we often say, you know, what sound is this? And they're like, oh, I'll make a guess. And then the teacher will say, nope, it's not that sound. We want kids to have a path to get the correct answer. And so one of my first chapters is all about how do we get kids, even when they know nothing, to have a way of getting to the answer. And so through scaffolds, and what would a scaffold look like at an early age? And so that's where I wanted to get at. I wanted kids to have no teacher needed, and a path that had a scaffold. And so that's where I was looking at when I was training, is ways that I could bring independence to the very youngest when they knew nothing. So,
am I hearing right that you're hoping that kids could literally just learn how to read on their own without any adult help?
No, actually, it's just that your first lessons are very geared towards a scaffold that helps them to say, okay, I know what this letter is. You know, you work so hard on developing the scaffold, then you start working in text. So your scaffold is first, then you start working in text. So absolutely not. I don't think we can ever get to a point where we're without adults, because another piece of my book is a huge piece, which is how do you observe the reader? You know, what does it mean to observe those that are seeing like readers, their letter knowledge? What should I think? Because it goes back to, remember, I started thinking, what do I do with these notes that I take when a child doesn't know the A? What do I do with that, right? What if they don't know the B? What do I do with that? Just keep showing them the A and the B? And the answer to that is no, right? Like you're kind of getting that feel that you have to show them how to see the letter like a reader. And so I really think I lean more into the fact that that you have to create this path. You have to take kids on a journey, and the start of their journey is through a scaffold that you create so that they always come back to it. And we stop the guessing. We really help them to see how to know. And the teacher is a pivotal in that. The words that she says, how she listens and causes the child to listen for themselves and to see for themselves, instead of being the one to always be the shower. You know, remember I told you 30 years ago, I was the one going, okay, I'll just show this to you, and I'll just do all this work for you. And in the end, there were always these kids that were left behind. And that's that's the problem that this book is aimed at solving.
This is really fascinating. How can the typical parent, because we do have lots of teachers who are listening to the show, but I think most of our listeners are parents and grandparents and caregivers. How can we apply some of the things that you're talking about into our daily 20-minute read along with our kids?
I love that. A lot of it is, one of my big things is if I'm going to say, leave you with one thing, ask a child, what did you notice? Like if I were to say the one thing we often, we commit my favorite word is a non-word. It's assume-aside. We assume wrongly. But when you say, what did you notice? It's surprising what kids are noticing, right? Like, oh, I noticed that there's 2 letters here, or I noticed that there's 2 words here. But then you're going to get at an understanding of where your child is coming from, but it also sends the message that you believe that they are a reader and they are a noticer. You're the kind of kid who can notice. So what did you notice? Just by asking the question, you send this invisible message that you're the kind of kid that can notice. Those kind of pieces, even saying things like, here's the first letter, here's the first letter, here's where we're going to start, can be really, really helpful. Those kind of pieces. When I read with kids, I pull my finger across in front of the words that I'm reading, not so that they can, follow along word by word. It's not like that. It's that they have to develop a left to right way of looking. I was working in a room with about 140 teachers, and I asked them to find the clock. We were in a new stadium, our studio area, and they looked and they all went left to right, right? A non-reader won't do that. A playground reader won't do that. So we have to actually train these eyes to be more automatic. So to pull the finger in front of the text as you read it, as a habit, is really developing the eye movement left to right and that development of automaticity. So those 2 ways can really get you jump started into doing that. And then always saying, what do you see? What do you hear? What are you thinking? And don't commit a suicide assume wrongly, rather that they are paying attention to you or actually seeing what you're seeing.
For the longest time here on the podcast, I've been saying that when we're reading with our kids and we ask them what they think about the story and what they think is going on, that we're empowering them. And it sounds like you are supporting that when you're asking kids, what do they notice?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So important. The little things that we do as parents can make such a big difference in kids' lives.
Absolutely. And when I first wrote this, I think I was really from the lens of the teacher, and I wrote it and I shared it with a copy with a professor. And she's like, Jen, every first year teacher should have this, every young teacher of young children, but more importantly, every parent should have it, because it's written with analogies that are written for the parent, right? Like, it really is. And I got an email just yesterday that said, Jen, I have to share this with you. I forgot to tell you that I was working with a parent and I used your analogies, and they're so helpful. Why? Because when you just break it down into small increments and easy to understand ways.
Yeah. How much? So we've talked a lot here on the show about the fact that kids learn how to read up until 2nd grade, and then starting in 3rd grade, they're reading to learn. And so if they're not reading in 3rd grade, they're really up the creek without a paddle, so to speak. How much? What kind of things can we do, not only as a parent, but also can we get our schools to change so that there are fewer and fewer kids getting to 3rd grade not able to read?
It's a really great thought and idea. First of all, I think we often think, okay, if we just focus on, there's 2 misconceptions by that statement that you made, that we should 2nd grade and then 3rd grade is learning to read. First of all, some teachers, the misconception is that we can focus solely on sounds, and that we can focus on reading to kids, and we don't have to have that expectation of engagement of kids within more complex text. So I think, we read chapter books in 1st grade. 1st grade actually hits the first chapter books. That's how complex we start to get, and into 3rd grade. So, restate your question so I make sure that I answer that. And I know, right? Like how you get off a little bit. So,
it's just, I'm wondering how, because our education system is, the teachers that are out there are doing heroic jobs, and we're spending boatloads of money on our education system, but it's still failing a lot of kids. It's, I don't know what the numbers are, but I've seen that there are, at least a quarter of the kids, when they get to high school, they're functionally illiterate, just horrible, so I'm wondering what we can do to make sure that when kids are, expected to read, to learn, how can we make sure that they're actually reading?
I think at all levels, I think one of the things I want to challenge your listener to really think about is that consider every child having a literacy or literary life, right? And a classroom experience is that literary life. And one of the pieces that you'll find in highly effective classrooms is that children's opportunity to have their eyes on text and engaged with text is higher, right? And when they're engaged, and here's where the complexity of it, engagement is different than compliance, right? Like fill out this worksheet, just do it, complete it, be done. Engage says, I have something inside of that game. I want to learn about this book. I want to learn more. I want to find out what happens. I want to go further with this nonfiction. What can this nonfiction book teach me? I really want to know those things. How do we develop, when we go into thinking like a reader again, we need to develop in kids that idea as we work up through all levels. What is that literary opportunity? Now, having said that, when you walk, what does that mean? Go into a classroom, and I'm getting ready in about a month to do this with the school district. We're going to walk through the literary life of their students to say how many opportunities do they have to engage with random versus blocked practice. And what that means is, like, if you were I like to use the basketball scenario. If you were a basketball coach, you would teach all of these drills, but then you would make sure you get it into the game right away. And you spend almost 50% of your time or more in these 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5 drills, because it's not just that, I know I had a child who could shoot 90% from the 3-point line, but you wouldn't have wanted him on the team because he couldn't do that in the game. Mm-hmm. And so same with readers. Now go back to the literary life. If you spend so many times on drills and skills, there is not a direct transfer into the automaticity of its use in reading. So even if you go higher and you're focusing on, let's say, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and you're talking about vocabulary, if you don't get that into the game enough, then they still won't know the vocabulary word. You probably learned a word before that you've never then had an opportunity to use. And if you don't have that opportunity to use that word, then you're going to lose it. So we need to have both these blocked practices or skill time, and then random practice. That's the variability option, which says now I need to engage that skill in a variety of different options. And that's even from the earliest of age, you can infuse variability so that kids start to say, okay, it's a B here, and it's a B here, and it's a B here. It's the word and here. It's the word and. And then obviously the skills are higher when you talk about those higher level reading skills. But back to your question, really hits on the literary life. So when are they getting practice in the game and outside of the game? And when are they making sure they pull it together? And I think when you look at the day, we are in so many compliance skills that I just finished the worksheet. There's no engagement there, right? Like versus I read a book versus I finished a big project I was working on. I was writing a paper, but I really was interested in what I was reading. That's where we're going to really elevate our students, is when we start to elevate the expectation of engagement, that reading is truly that great and joyful, right? Like it's fun, not, oh my gosh, we have to write a paper. No, you get to, like, this is so fun, right? Who wouldn't want to have their voice shared? So those are the ways we have to approach kids. So over time, we start to have a literary life that you go into schools and kids are always reading, right? Kids are always writing because they want to, because their choice, because of all those components.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, and it's, I hope it's not a silly question, but you were talking about permanence and object and help kids do that. What do we do with their kids when we say, okay, this is the letter, whatever the letter is, and when you see that letter, it's this sound, except when it's in this word, and then, all those crazy... Yeah. That we have 24 letters that represent 40-something sound.
44. Mm-hmm.
44. Yes.
Made in 240 different ways, 40 some ways, 44. I don't know. It's a lot, right? It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things is you have to see a child's journey. And I think that is really, really part of what we're talking about is that you can't have flexibility unless you first have permanence. So we talked a little bit differently, but if you are going to say your first readers have to learn A as a and B as ba and C as ka. Once you have a baseline, then you can create flexibility.
Okay.
So like your first years, your preschool, your kindergarten kids will want to focus on creating some semblance of permanence. In fact, even in when about mid-year, we usually do digraphs. We put in SH and TH and WH. And what happens then is they have an S and an H confusion because kids don't know if it should say S or H or Sh. And now their brain is trying to work through that. So that's when we're talking about the youngest of kids and we want to throw more at them. They don't have one thing known well. You know, analogies and flexibility are based off of the fact that you believe something is first known well, and then you can start to create and invoke this flexibility, which also means you have to say, okay, once they know that well, then you can start to say, okay, but, or and, right? It's either says this or this. It either says this or this. And good job, right? Oh, you know, and you're not wrong. But remember, sounds get us started and meaning finishes the job, right? So if you don't know the word variability, for example, and it's put in a sentence for you, and you go ability, but you don't know the word because it's never been in through your ears, it cannot come out of your mouth. Mm-hmm. So we often think, okay, once we have this sentence and all this, so yeah, a lot of phonics can really help spelling, but even in the end, what does it look like, right? Which word could it be? OUGH is such a common one to really think through the varied ways to do that. But yeah, so that's where reading and lots of reading, think about it, it can only go in your ears if you're reading a lot, if you're being, you know, if you hear lots of really great talking about text. So when you're, one of the elements of thinking like a reader is that if you ever read aloud to kids, make them talk about the text. And the reason why they talk about the text is they have to use the language from the text to tell you about it. So they're automatically upping their vocabulary just by talking about the text.
Fascinating. This is, I love this. I love that we have all these studies and guides and tools that parents and hopefully teachers can use so that we can help every kid develop a love of learning. I have a feeling we've just scratched the subject, the surface of the subject. We should tell people where they can go to find out more about building readers from playground to print and also find out more about you.
All right. You know, well, my book is on Amazon. So Building Readers from Playground to Print is, you can find that on Amazon, but my website, buildingareader.com, is where you can find out more about me. So thank you so much.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of Building Readers from Playground to Print. Our guest has been Jennifer Burns. Jennifer, thanks so much for being with us.
And thanks for all that you do to build this joy in readers. I appreciate it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful, starting with our guest, Padma Venkatraman. Please be sure to check out her middle grade novel, Safe Harbor. Also want to thank Jennifer Burns. Be sure to check out Building Readers from Playground to Print. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Chris Doherty, Rory Grady. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.